So, everyone, this is Jackie Cooper with the GBA Talk Show Spotlight. And today I have Gerard. And Gerard is the founder of the GBA. And he's going to tell his story of how the GBA got started. Because the Government Blockchain Association is a remarkable association that's grown over the years. And it continues to grow. And it's leading the way with the blockchain maturity model and a lot of the other programs. So, Gerard, how are you doing today?
I am bodacious.
I have no doubt. So, why don't you go ahead and share for those that have not heard the story before, because really you have shared it, but not everyone knows the remarkable story of how the GBA got started. So, first, there's that, but also, how did you get involved with Bitcoin, blockchain, and all that other innovative tech?
Well, I think the answer to the question really has to go back a lot further than the tech and blockchain and Bitcoin, because one of the things that's really at the core of GBA today is the issue of integrity and trust, right?
Mm.
And I think that the story actually starts back in the 1980s, actually, when I was in high school. So I'm going to tell you my personal story leading up to when we started GBA, because I think that really sets the stage for the whole thing. So the first thing I want to say is I grew up lower middle class. My dad worked for the government as a lower level government employee. When he was when he was a kid, his dad died when he was 16, and he had to essentially quit school and take care of the family. Right? So he worked during the day, drove a cab at night. Really good man, hardworking guy. Just a really salt of the earth guy. My mom was a diplomat from Colombia. So her side of the family was very, upper crust of society. And when she met my dad, who essentially was a low-level government worker and a cab driver, her family told her that you can live in his world or ours, you just can't live in both, right? So my mom walked away from, living in palaces, basically, and being with the top edge of society to marry my dad, because that's what her principles led her to do. So anyway, I grew up with a loving family, but not a lot of money. Anyway, so when I was 16, my dad died, and my mom had a nervous breakdown. So I was not technically, but somewhat orphaned at 16. I had watched a lot of John Wayne movies, right? And John Wayne was all about integrity, right? And so I said, well, look, I can take care of myself. I don't need help anybody else. So I was going to a Catholic high school at the time, and I didn't take any help from anybody. So I ended up working 5 jobs through a high school and college. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I did different things at different times, but typically I would work 5 jobs concurrently. So when I was in college, I drove a truck from midnight to 6. I managed I managed a bowling alley. I was a stagehand supervisor at an arena. I was a security guard, and I was in the National Guard. Right? Because when you're that young, you can't make a lot of money. But I had a mortgage payment at 16. Right? Well, 18, 19, 20. So all through that, and it was the first time that I encountered an integrity challenge. So I was a starving college kid, and I remember I was working security at the back door of the sports arena, and this guy came up to me and he offered me $300 for me to let him in the back door, and girls offered me sex. There were all kinds of things, but I remember I said no to him, and he cursed me as he walked away. But I remember how good I felt about me, right? I
Yeah,
mean, $300 was like $1 million to me at that
it's huge.
time. Anyway, so that sort of stuck in my mind. And then fast forward, um, I got a job after school, and then I ended up getting laid off 5 times in 3 years. So at
Wow.
this point, I was married. We had 4 kids, and we were living with my mom. We lost our home. She was living in a $600 a month. I mean, she was living on a $600 a month Social Security income, and it was tough. I mean, we had 4. We were living in a 2-bedroom duplex, all of us. All 4 of my kids slept in one room with a bunk bed. We didn't have any money. We couldn't afford to keep the place clean. We had rats running around at the ceiling. I remember before I put the kids to bed, I'd literally have to wipe the roaches off the bed, right, before we put them down. We had to sell our car to buy diapers. At one point, my daughter had seizures, And I remember walking to the hospital carrying my daughter, and I was afraid they wouldn't take her because we already owed them so much money.
Yeah.
So it was tough, but Kathy, my wife, stuck with me through thick and thin, and eventually I got a job, and I got a good paying job, right? Prior to that, I had spent some time in the military in both Army infantry and intelligence. So I got out of the military. That's when I lost my job those couple times. So I finally got a job. And listen, when you fall into a hole that deep, it takes a long time to get out. We had finally got out of that. And my boss came to me and they said, listen, Gerard, and I didn't like the company that I was working for. They didn't have a lot of ethics and integrity. They lied on proposals. They talked bad about each other. But I was so afraid to leave that job because I'd been through such poverty, and I was afraid of going back there, right? I mean, the bill collectors had just stopped calling. So they pulled me into this office, and they said, Gerard, look, we'd like to pay you to have this credential to be able to do these assessments, and in order to win these very large government contracts. And but you have to promise to stay with us for 3 years. So they actually asked me twice. The first time I turned them down. The second time I said, all right, well, I'll do it. So after they paid for me to get this training, this certification, they pulled me into this office, and it was my boss, my boss's boss, and the senior vice president of the company, and his daughter that was the president of a small woman-owned business. And they said, Gerard, look, here's the deal. We've got this multi-bazillion-dollar government contract that we've got it wired, so we're the only ones that can win it, right? My daughter's going to do it. The big company will provide all the resources. And one of the things that we built in here is this assessment. We paid a lot of money for you to be able to do. What's it going to take? And I said, well, there's 350 requirements. And they said, no, Gerard, you don't understand. Look, it's a multi-bazillion dollar contract. We've got it wired. One of the things is this assessment that we paid a lot of money for you to do. You tell us the number, we'll write the check. And I said, now I'm realizing what they're asking, so I don't know what to do. So I just repeat myself. And I said, well, there's 350 requirements. And they're like, no, Gerard. And I said, well, it normally takes about 2 years to essentially put all the controls in place to get this assessment. And I said, well, when do you need it by? They said 2 weeks. I said, when did you get started? And they said, we haven't started yet. And now I know exactly what they're asking me to do. So I repeat myself and I say, well, there's 355 practices. And they said, Gerard, cut the stuff. They used a different word. And they said, you tell us the number, we'll write the check. But if you fail to do it, there will be consequences. And at that moment, it's like I had this flashback, right, of selling my car to buy diapers and the rats. And one night when it was raining, the water built up on the drywall. I couldn't afford to get it fixed. So the water built up on the drywall. The drywall collapsed and the rat fell into bed with us, right? And I just remember the extreme poverty. And as I'm sitting there in that office, and we were at the first time in many, many years the bill collectors had just stopped calling us. We had just moved into a house. Like we were in a good place for the first time in over 10 years. Mm-hmm. And they're now putting this thing in front of me. And I said, well, I appreciate your kind offer. And I'm sure somebody will take it. It's just not me. So within a couple of days, I was terminated due to an economic downturn. And as I was pulling out of the driveway, the parking lot of that office building, I thought, what am I going to tell my wife? Like she's hung in with me this whole time. And now we're right back to where we started. I said, I'm going to go visit my mom. She's living out by herself. She was, I don't know, in her 90s at the time. And I said, I'm going to go visit my mom. And so as I made a right turn out of the parking lot, I got a phone call from an old friend of mine. He said, hey, Gerard, are you doing that assessment stuff? And I said, yeah. He said, well, what are you up to these days? And I promise you, I had never thought about this before. I believe the good Lord just planted this on my brain. And I said, I just hung up my own shingle. He said, well, that's great, because I just got the authority to cut a purchase order for $10,000 to explore this, and we'd like to get this done in the next 2 years. He said, are you available? And I said, let me check my calendar. As a matter of fact, I am. So, so I went over, I visited my mom, then I went over to his place. It wasn't too far from where my mom lived. And I walked out of his office with a check, not just a purchase order, but a check for $10,000, right? And that started my business. And from that point forward, man, we had made so much money. I was billing $250 an hour. We took the kids to Disney World. We paid off all of our debts. I was living high on the hog, right? I was able to do some things for some friends of mine that were in tough situations. And man, life was so good. I remember one Christmas time, we had presents that went all the way up to the roof. I mean, it was just because when you're in that broke place for so long and you start getting all kinds of money, we were not responsible with our money. We just spent it like it was water, but daggone it felt good. Anyway, I then started getting contacted by people in China, and they said, would you come to China and evaluate these Chinese defense contractors on behalf of the Chinese government? And I said, you do realize I'm a former United States intelligence professional, right? And they said, no, we know that about you. We actually know quite a bit about you. And I said, okay. But they said, I said, that's comforting. But they said, we have it on good account that you can't be bribed. And when we send our own Chinese military officers in for these $500 million contracts, they're bribed. So I said, okay. I said, well, look, I don't want to look at anything top secret. I don't want to get involved in any kind of espionage political thing. You know, we've got to make sure that, you know, everybody's okay with it. I made sure that, you know, I set some boundaries in place. And by the way, they ended up showing me some crazy stuff, right? But I ended up taking 20 trips to China looking at this advanced, sophisticated stuff. And Jackie, I'm not a really intellectual guy, right? The name of my other business is Common Sense Solutions. Right. I try to operate at about a 5th grade level. Right. I figure if you're dealing with like nuclear scientists and medical doctors and economists, right, with PhDs, if you stay at 5th grade, you can talk to all of them. Right.
It's sort of like that TV show.
Yeah, exactly. The 3rd grade or the 5th grade or whatever. But so I've never pretended to be really smart. So anyway, actually Columbo, I don't know if you remember the TV show Columbo. When I would do audits and assessments, they would refer to me as Columbo, right? One more thing, but anyway, so
but I have to interrupt you for a second. For whoever doesn't know you, you are phenomenal with telling stories and also knowing history. So I would say that you are very, very knowledgeable and very intelligent. But keep going.
Well, I appreciate that. Anyway, so I would ask when I would do these assessments. You know, at first it was great. They would show me all this stuff, and the kinds of assessments I was doing, it had a lot to do with statistics and advanced math and stuff. And so I would say, they would show me all of this really complicated data, and I would ask them simple questions like, well, how do you know? And I would get a deer in the headlights look, right? And they were ready to answer these very sophisticated questions. But when I get to really core stuff, like, well, how do you know that information is true, right? They weren't prepared for that. Because the reality was it wasn't. And as I started peeling the onion back, I started realizing that it didn't smell very good. And I started identifying all kinds of corruption, right? Mm-hmm. Now, they wanted me there because I couldn't be bribed, right? And they thought I wouldn't be corrupt, but they didn't want me to be too honest.
They didn't want you to find the truth.
and on one occasion, I said, look, I'm sorry, these documents are fake. You can't pass. And they said, well, we're sorry, but you can't leave. And I said, well, that's very funny, but you still can't pass. I said, we're not kidding you. You can't leave. And they held me for 3 days in conditions that were a little bit less than 5-star. I'll let you all imagine what that is. And they're in control of my transportation, my food, beverage, housing, everything like that. And I'll never forget, after 3 days, it was about 10 o'clock at night. They had taken me to this industrial park in the middle of nowhere. Right. And I remember looking out the window. It was 10 o'clock at night. I was surrounded by 30 Chinese people screaming at me. One of them said, you have to pass us. If you don't, they will fire all of us. Our children will have no food. And I looked out the window, and literally as far as the eye could see, there wasn't a single light. I was completely on my own. And I said, because I have this perspective, one day I'm going to meet my maker in heaven. And he's got this DVD with my whole life. He's going to put it on big screen TV. And actually now it's streaming. It's probably not a DVD. But he said, and I got enough stuff on that DVD or streaming service that I'm not really proud of. I've done a lot of things I'm not proud of. I'm not adding anything else to the list, right? So after 3 days, and they try to use women to, and I was like, look, I'm married, I'm not doing that. But after 3 days, I got tired of it. They took me to my hotel. I got my luggage. They took me to the airport, and I flew out of there. When I got back here to the States, um, I reported, hey, listen, you've been complaining about all this fraud in China. I can tell you exactly how they're doing it. And if you change this one policy, then it'll stop all of this fraud in China. You've been complaining about this for years. But it'll cost you 60% of your revenue because 60% of your revenue is coming from these fake assessments in China. So now, just prior to that, I had started, my son had bought a little crypto and he did very well. And so I looked into it. I saw blockchain was the secret sauce. So I started a little meetup. And I was having, I had about 30, 40 people meeting at this restaurant every month, just talking about different blockchain use cases. It was a nice kind of fun thing to do. There's no revenue or anything like that. Mm-hmm. But when I reported, they said, let's get back on the phone in about a week. So a week later, I pulled into this parking lot. I was mentoring these young kids, kind of like Big Brother career mentorship. And there was this kid waiting there. I'll never forget. He was in the restaurant. I could see him from my car through the restaurant glass window. And I get on the phone with these people, and they said, "Thanks for getting on the phone with us. This is not going to be pleasant." And I was like, "Okay." And they said, "We've decided to terminate your corporate and professional credentials. Do you have any questions?"
Oh my gosh!
And I was stunned. Right. And I said, "Is your decision final?" And they said, "Yes." And I said, "Well, I guess it doesn't matter if I have any questions." And they said, "We'll send a letter commemorating the event." I said, "I'll keep my eyes open for it." They said, "Thank you very much." And I said, "Goodbye." And in that moment, I had lost my entire career.
Right.
Now, remember I said we weren't very responsible with the money. I had virtually no savings. Right. I'm now going into my 60s. Right. I've just lost everything. I was sitting in my car and I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. I was doubled over and I thought, what am I going to tell my wife? We're going to lose our house, right? I've got nothing, right? My whole career is based on the relationships and credibility that I've built in this industry. And then I looked at that kid waiting for me. I was his hero and he was struggling with enough of his own things. And I said, I got to pull it together. Then I thought of this little meetup that we had with 30, 40 people meeting every week. And I said, I got to make this work. So from that point forward, Kathy and I worked 6 a.m. till 2 a.m. Monday through Saturday to get the GBA off the ground. And, wow. And that's where GBA started. And the very first thing we wrote in GBA was the ethics statement, right? It was the very first thing we wrote, the most important thing on the website. So I think the GBA story has to be told in the context of that history leading up to it.
I agree. Now, how did you come up with the name GBA?
Well, my other business is pretty simple. I told you I'm not very smart. Common sense solutions, right? I figured government blockchain associations. I was like, I had this meetup talking about blockchain, and now so here's the thing. I had a government background, right? Yeah. And when I looked at what was going on, all the blockchain activity was really happening in New York, right on Wall Street, or in Silicon Valley. And it was being done by Deloitte and IBM. I couldn't compete with them, but nobody was talking about government, right? And I said, one day, government's going to be one of the largest acquirers of blockchain technology, and nobody's there now. Look, I got no money. I have no relationships. I don't know anything about the subject. I can't compete with IBM in the state that I'm now. But if I plant my flag in government, right, hopefully by the time they come around, I'll have something so that at least we've got a fighting chance. So that's why I decided to go with government blockchain. And it's an association, so I just thought the Government Blockchain Association.
It's perfect. It's perfect. So when you first started it, was it just, in the Washington area? I mean, there are 500 various chapters now all around the world. So how did you, I know that there were certain loyal followers that helped get this started. How did that kind of expand?
So we started in the DC area, actually right outside of DC in Ireland. And then what happened was we got a phone call from He's now the governor of Colorado. At the time, he was one of the chairs of the Congressional House Blockchain Caucus. His name escapes me. It'll hit me in a second. Anyway, we got a phone call and said, hey, the congressman is going to be in, not Denver, in Boulder, I think Boulder. And he'd like to do a blockchain meeting. Is that something you could help us with? And the thing is, it's going to be like tomorrow or the day. It was very short term. And I said, of course, no problem. Sure, we can do that. Because I was so eager for GBA to have some meaning, and I thought this is a great opportunity. So I didn't know anybody in Colorado, right? So what we did is we created a blockchain meetup group in Colorado. And then I went on to LinkedIn. I searched everybody who was in Colorado, probably Boulder, that had blockchain. And then I reached out to every single one of them, right? And I used Meetup. I looked for the Meetup groups. And I worked pretty much around the clock to create the Meetup group, find somebody out there who had a venue, put the whole thing together, and within 12 to 15 hours, we had an event, right? And we then got contacted by the congressman's office, and they said, hey, there's been a change of plan. He's not coming. And I was like, oh, no. So my writing buddy was a guy named Dan Callahan. He kind of helped me get this thing off the ground. And I said, Dan, you call him up. And I just read him the right act. So Dan said that he called the office up, and he just started. And they're like, okay, fine, we get it. So the congressman can come. He can't stay very long. He'll stay for 10, 15 minutes, right? I was like, fine, because I promised all these people the congressman was coming. And he ended up coming and staying for several hours. And that's how we got our first chapter off the ground in Colorado. Now, what I was doing in the chapter here is every month we were doing a different topic. One month it was healthcare, next month identity. And I could Google the information to put a presentation together. And then we had somebody from Atlanta contact us, right? And then New York. And I said, okay, we can start these chapters in these different places. I'll create the content here. I'll send it to you. And then you can actually you do a meetup just like I did, and we started to do it that way. And then I started getting contacted by people in foreign countries, right? And so I said, okay, we need to go global. So I made a list of the top 200 cities in the world that had the most number of government employees. And for every one of those cities, I went to LinkedIn. I did a search for everybody in those cities that had blockchain. I reached out to them. I used Meetup. I used a whole bunch of different technologies. And I literally created 200 chapters. And I said, look, here's the deal. You get together, you do a monthly meeting, right? We'll create the content. We'll send it out to you. You can translate it into your language. You can localize it, but we'll all work together. And in a short amount of time, we launched 200 chapters, right? And then there was this thing, you probably heard about it. It was in the news a lot. It's called COVID.
Yeah.
Right? And it decimated all of our chapters.
Yeah.
We were
Except
back.
if it went virtual.
Well, so then at that point I said, okay, well, we've got to switch to virtual, and we created these things called working groups. So today we have over 50 working groups in all kinds of different, everything from elections and cybersecurity, and just pretty much defense and infosec.
I was wondering how the working groups came about, because it's huge. It's just every topic you can possibly think about.
Exactly. So, but we were still struggling with a revenue model, right? How do people make money, right? And what do people need? And then what happened was, our members who were trying to sell to government said, "Look, Gerard, we can't sell to government because they don't trust us, right? They've heard of FTX, and they've heard of Terra Luna and Celsius, and by the way, you know that crypto is just for drug dealers and human traffickers and terrorists." And I said, the problem is they don't have a box to check. In every other industry, right, there's a PMP certifications, there's cybersecurity certifications, there's all kind of technology certifications. And these acquisition people, they don't know anything about blockchain. They can't tell the difference between a good one and a bad one. So I said, they need a box to check. And so we started to create this thing called the blockchain maturity model. Exactly. And the blockchain maturity model is an assessment framework that basically you can use to determine if a blockchain solution is trustworthy or not. And then what happened was we started working with all of our working groups, and we realized, having a core model is good, and it works for both permissioned and permissionless blockchains, any technology, any industry domain. We spent 2 years putting this thing together, and honestly, it's fantastic. Um, nobody else, nobody else had done it or was successful at doing it. Some had tried. Um, um, and then what happened was at the United Nations, there was this guy named Dino Cataldo Dell'Accio. You've interviewed him before, and
Yes, I have.
he's a good friend of us, of many of us now. And he had built an identity management solution, a blockchain-based identity management solution for the United Nations. And when he went to go implement it, um, his constituents, the 195 members that contribute to the pension fund, they said, you can't deploy a blockchain solution for a $90 billion fund without some kind of independent verification, right? And so he went to ISO. They were still working on a glossary. He went to a NOTBA. He went to IEEE. Nobody had an assessment framework until he came to the GBA and he found out about the BMM. Now, the BMM wasn't complete then, but he jumped on board and actually became one of the authors of it. And that's how he got involved. So then what happened was he went back to the United Nations and he said, hey, we have this thing called the Internet Governance Forum, the United Nations Internet Governance Forum, right? And it's a multi-stakeholder global organization. It includes Microsoft, Google, ICANN, MIT, Meta. These are the people that actually govern the internet, right? And they have groups for, financial inclusion, digital health, everything except for Web3. And he said, look, these GBA people, they really have figured this thing out in terms of blockchain assurance. So they came to us and they said, would you be willing, Dino came to us and said, would you be willing to lead the United Nations Internet Governance Forum Dynamic Coalition on Blockchain Assurance and Standardization? And we said, sure. And then then we essentially brought the BMM to be adopted by that group as a standard for establishing global blockchain standards. So
It's amazing. Yeah, no, it's amazing the history of this, and I've seen a portion of it being part of the organization for the past 2 to 3 years, and I know how much it's needed because of the change in technology right now, and how many businesses are saying that they're using blockchain, but like you said, you don't know the level of development or whether they're going to be around in a few years. So this is really, really critical.
And
Where
so many of them lie, right? They lie, they hyperinflate. It's sad. The level of trust in our industry is pathetic because there's nobody checking.
it's hard to check because of the vocabulary that's needed in order to do that. Where do you see the BMM being used? I know that there are different countries that are looking at implementing it to be required, and other organizations as well. Where do you see it going?
Well, the first place where we heard it being used was actually in Mexico. So we heard that Mexican officials were using the BMM as selection criteria. Then the next thing that kind of knocked my socks off is we were contacted by Oracle, and they
Mhm.
said, "Hey, can you guys do a BMM assessment of our Oracle blockchain platform?" And I said, "You guys are Oracle. You're one of the most trusted technology companies in the world. Why do you want the GBA to do a BMM assessment?" And they said, "We're bidding on a contract for a project in Riverside, California, and the RFP specifically is asking us about our BMM status." And I said, Shazam. So we ended up doing a BMM assessment for them. And then we were contacted by the government of India. And they said, listen, well, I'm making a long story short, but the bottom line is they basically said, let me back up. So India has this, under the Ministry of Information and Technology, they have this organization called the Software Technology Park of India. And their mission is to incubate and mature software companies all through India so that they can export their software services globally and attract all of that global capital into India, right?
Makes sense.
And so they have a bunch of centers of excellence. One of them is called a PIRI. It's their blockchain center of excellence. And so the CEO of that, it's sort of a quasi government company. It's a company sort of started by it's under it's organized under the government, right? And 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 they contacted us and they said, hey, we've heard about this blockchain maturity model. Would you tell us about it? And we did. And they said, we want the Indian government to subsidize BMM assessments in India so that you can promote Indian blockchain companies through the connections there at the IGF Dynamic Coalition to help promote Web3 Indian companies globally. And so we're actually starting, they've got a cohort with 15 companies. We're actually in the process of getting them ramped up, and then we've got 35 prior. So the government of India now is subsidizing BMM assessments for Indian companies. And we're in talks right now with the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, different countries all around the world, because what they want to do is they want to mature their Web3 companies, again, to bring that global capital into their countries.
Exactly. I'm curious, did you go back and find out how the BMM was actually put into the California legislation to require it?
I did some, because the first time I had heard about it, it was already in the RFP, right? I did. And I don't know if that person wants me to disclose it publicly, but you and I both know that it was a big fan of the GBA and the BMM. There was a consultant for that county, and is also talking to other government entities in Florida and Texas. So listen, I think it just makes sense that the BMM is going to be adopted as a standard for quality in blockchain solutions.
No, I agree. It is going to be adopted, and it's good because it's sort of is like the bar exam, where you need to have it in order to be certified as a lawyer. And I think that if you are going to be hanging your shingle out as a blockchain company, you need to have that level of assurance as well to know where you are in the scheme of things for your growth. So I see this as a positive step for our community. So what's your role now within the GBA? Where do you see yourself helping guide the GBA? Because you've taken many, many different parts of this, and you helped develop the BMM. But where do you see yourself going?
Well, currently I'm the executive director and the janitor at the Garden Project. Listen, the reality is where the GBA is right now. There's two realities, right? They're all almost mutually conflicting. We have some amazing people, right? We've got a marketing team that does branding. That they're phenomenal. We've got a sales team that does great. We've got a CFO that really, Sean Kurzweil really pulled us out of the tailspin, right? When COVID had hit, look, there's a number of things. When we started GBA, I'd never started an association before, right? We thought, gosh, well, we're just going to do this, and everybody's going to jump in, and money was going to pour in, and financial management's never been my strong suit, right? And so that was an area of weakness. And so when Sean came on board as a CFO, in his very kind words, we were a dumpster fire, right? And so he turned it around, and we've got some incredible people, but I'm still the glue that holds everything together, right?
Yeah.
Not because I want to be, but because while we've built a lot of pieces, we've not really built a good central nervous system, a good skeleton, right? My goal and hope ultimately is to be able to step away so the GBA can live beyond me, and eventually for the GBA to be a DAO, right? That's what I'm working with. All of the parts are strong. Things are connecting really well. The emerging web tech, the Web3 emerging tech directory is coming up. There's just a lot of pieces that are really working together well. But what I want to see is can I mature this organization so I can step away, right? And know that it's going to go into the future with the same quality, ethics, and values that's gotten it to this point, right? For the longest time, we really didn't make any money. And all of these people came on board because of intangibles, right? GBA members have three things in common. Number one, they're out of the box thinkers.
True.
They're willing to take a risk,
Mm-hmm.
right? And they're interested in something bigger than themselves.
Yes.
Right. And folks that are very self-serving and don't have this kind of goals, they might come in, but they don't stick around. Right. And so the culture in GBA is really, really important. That's the glue that holds everything together. And I can't step away until that culture essentially is institutionalized. And also there's enough of a revenue model that it can be self-sustaining. But as soon as I get to that point, baby cakes, I'm going to go to the Bahamas.
And you'll be doing blockchain there. I don't think you're ever going to retire.
Yeah. And honestly, it's not that I want to, but I'd like to get to the point where we don't have to work so hard, right? And but we're getting there. We're it's taken us 7 years to get to this point.
It's phenomenal. It's just phenomenal. So, any last minute thoughts? I know we're going to have a whole series of various conversations about different pieces of the GBA, but any last minute thoughts that you'd like to share with everyone who's listening about your journey and where you would like to see, again, the GBA going? I know we will have different in-person events as well as virtual events, but over the next few years, what's your dream?
Well, let me answer the first part of the question, which is sort of my parting thoughts of where I'd like to see this going. When I started this, I didn't know what I was doing, right? But I also knew that if I just tried to do some good, right? If I try to solve problems, if I just try to make an impact, right, then eventually we'd capitalize on it. And that day is here. The opportunities that have been presented to me right now are just kind of mind blowing. But where I am in my life in terms of the years, the miles under my tires, I would say the most important thing is to live a life of significance, right? And focus on solving problems and making the world a better place. We didn't focus on making the money, right? I knew the money would come, but we really focused on making a difference and making an impact. And sometimes you fail, right? We failed in a lot of things. We did one event, we lost a ton of money, right? It threw us into a tailspin. But you get back up and you keep going. And if you believe in your vision and you're really trying to do something that's going to create value for others, there's no guarantee in terms of where you end up, but at least you would have lived a life worthy of the journey.
I agree with you. And for those that really are new to the Government Blockchain Association, I would definitely recommend reaching out. Everyone within the GBA will mentor, will provide support, and will help you in your own journey. And for those that do know the GBA, definitely help us with marketing out because there's a lot of individuals who still need the education that the GBA provides, as well as the BMM. So, Gerard, really, I appreciate everything that you've done, both for the GBA as well as for myself. And having the story finally on, our talk show is awesome, because this is going to also, I think, inspire others to know how they want to kind of step in and support and also lead within the GBA. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Jackie. And I appreciate all the stuff that you've done for us as well. You've been a phenomenal just asset and friend over the years. So super excited to do this. So thanks again.
Yeah, no, this is fun. Everyone who's listening, definitely like and subscribe both on the YouTube side as well as on the talk show side. There's a lot more great conversations to come. I know I made a promise to Gerard when I first stepped in that I was going to try to interview every member of the GBA, and I still have a long way to go.
I think we have 5,000 members, so you, you need to get your Calendly all set up.
That's very true, very true. And it's growing very fast. In any event, everyone, I will talk to you soon. Thank you so much, Gerard. Bye.